My own son tried to kill me with a box of poisoned chocolates, and without knowing it, I saved my life by gifting them to my daughter-in-law and grandchildren. When Thomas called me, asking if I had eaten the chocolates, I answered no. I told him I had taken them to Laura's house for the kids. The silence on the other end of the phone was deadly. Suddenly he screamed in desperation, "What did you do?" At that moment I did not understand why he was so upset. I thought he was angry because I had given away his gift. How naive I was. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And now let's get back to the story. I woke up early that Saturday, right on my birthday. Outside, the October air was cool and clean, with that clarity that only autumn has when the light comes in slanted through the trees. I opened the dining room window, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the aroma of the coffee I was already preparing. At 69 years old, quiet mornings were my best gift. I have always been a man of simple routines, sweeping the patio, tending the plants, reading the newspaper before the sun comes up fully. That morning, while I was sweeping dry leaves from the garden, I heard the noise of an engine stopping in front of my gate. It was a delivery truck. The young driver got out and called me by my name, Mr. Donald Miller. I nodded, and he handed me a box wrapped with care. I signed on his tablet, and the kid added with an automatic smile, "Everything is paid for." The sender left a message, "Happy birthday." I stood watching him as the vehicle drove away. The box was dark brown with a gold ribbon and had a seal from a fancy shop in Manhattan. I do not usually receive gifts, much less from so far away. I took the package to the kitchen and placed it on the table with care, as if it were something fragile. Upon opening it, an intense aroma of cocoa filled the room. 12 chocolates perfectly aligned, wrapped in silver paper, with the name Artisan Delight engraved on each one. Underneath, a small white card. I took it between my fingers and read, "To the best father in the world, with love, Thomas." I stood motionless for a few seconds, looking at that neat and firm handwriting I had known since he was a child. Thomas, my son. We had not spoken for more than 5 minutes at a time for months. Work, the kids, his impatient character. I had learned not to expect too much, but seeing him remember me on my birthday provoked a mixture of surprise and tenderness that I did not know how to handle. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang several times and then cut off. I left him a short message. "Thanks, son. I did not expect this. You made my day." I waited a while but got no answer. I turned off the TV, went back to the kitchen, and poured coffee into my usual mug, the one with a crack I never wanted to fix. I looked at the box on the table while the coffee dripped from the filter. I thought that Thomas's kids, my grandkids, would adore those chocolates. Annie and Ellie were 2 sweet little whirlwinds, always running, always laughing. I decided to take the box to them. It will be better to share, I thought, and felt it was a good way to celebrate my day. Mid-morning, I got into my old truck and headed toward the neighborhood where Thomas lived. The road crossed a small bridge and bordered the river, the same one that had seen my son grow up. On the way, I stopped at a gas station. While filling the tank, I heard a voice behind me. "Donald, you still around here, old man?" It was Mark, a buddy from the factory days. We shook hands. "It is your birthday, right?" he asked. "That is right." "No party, just a quick visit to my son," I replied. Mark smiled. "Well, hope they treat you right, brother. At this age, we deserve it." We laughed, and I continued on my way. When I arrived at Thomas's house, I saw his car parked in front of the garage, but the front door was closed. I rang the doorbell and heard quick footsteps. It was Laura, my daughter-in-law, wearing a gray sweater and with her phone still in her hand. "Oh, Mr. Miller, what a surprise," she said with a kind but distracted smile. "Just passing by to say hello," I answered, lifting the box. "Thomas sent this to me for my birthday, but I thought the kids would enjoy it more than me." She hesitated for just an instant before responding. "What a beautiful gesture, Dad. They will love it." I went in for a few minutes. The house smelled of fresh detergent and toasted bread. On the floor, Lego pieces were scattered as usual. Annie and Ellie came running from the living room and threw themselves at my legs, shouting, "Grandpa! Grandpa!" I hugged them, feeling their warmth and their laughter. "I brought you a special gift from your dad," I said, lifting the box. Their eyes lit up. Laura put it on the kitchen counter and offered, "Do you want a coffee, Dad?" I shook my head. "No, dear. I was just passing through for a moment. I have things to do at home." I stayed a while watching how the kids played. Laura was answering messages on her phone without looking too much. She was a busy, practical woman, and although we never had conflicts, we never became close either. When I said goodbye, she walked me to the door. "Thanks for the thought," she said. "Thomas will be happy when I tell him." I returned a smile. "Take good care of them, Laura. They are all that matters." She nodded. I drove back while the sun began to lower. On the radio, an old program about the Vietnam War was playing. I had served there in my 20s, and every time I heard those voices of veterans, I felt a pang of nostalgia and exhaustion in my chest. I passed by the corner store, bought bread, milk, and some butter. The cashier, a young girl, wished me a happy birthday without knowing she had just done so. I smiled at her. Back at home, silence welcomed me like an old friend. I made a sandwich, turned on the television, but paid no attention to the news. On the table, Thomas's card was still there, under the yellow light of the dining room. "To the best father in the world." I stared at it for a long time, with a mixture of pride and a small pang of melancholy. I picked up the frame of an old photo where the three of us appeared. Thomas in his graduation gown, Laura hugging him and me behind with my hands on his shoulders. I thought about how fast the years pass, how one day your son stops being a child and becomes someone who barely calls you. I turned off the TV, put away the photo, and went to the window. Outside, the wind moved the branches of the old oak tree and car lights flickered in the distance. Everything seemed calm, serene. That night I fell asleep with a discreet smile, feeling lucky for a small gesture that had ignited something inside me. I never imagined that box of chocolates, the same one I considered a detail full of affection, would be the beginning of something much darker. If I had known what was coming, perhaps I would not have opened that box. But life does not warn you when a quiet day will turn into the first of the rest of your tragedy. That morning I woke up later than usual. I do not know why, maybe because of tiredness, or because the body, from time to time, demands you stop. The sun was already filtering through the window when I heard the phone ring over and over. I thought it would be a courtesy call, perhaps some belated congratulation. I picked up the device half asleep, and Thomas's voice shook me like an electric shock. "Dad, did you eat the chocolates?" he said with an urgency I had never heard before. My mind was still cloudy. The smell of fresh coffee wrapped around me, and the sound of boiling water seemed so daily that I did not understand the tone of his voice. "No, son," I replied, while placing the filter in the coffee maker. I took them to Laura and the kids. I thought they would be excited. "Why?" There was a brief, dense silence, and suddenly a scream on the other end of the line. "What did you do?" I froze. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, as if I did not understand the language. "What did you say? Repeat that, Dad." His voice was trembling. "Tell me you did not give them to anyone." "I took them yesterday, Thomas, to Laura and the kids." I heard a dry thud, as if he had thrown something to the floor, followed by a muffled curse. "My God," he murmured. "Damn it!" And he hung up. I stood motionless, phone in hand, hearing the beep of the dead tone. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood, that maybe he got angry for a silly reason, that he was simply exaggerating. Thomas had an impulsive character. I knew him well. I took a deep breath, rested the phone on the table, and tried to continue with my routine. I called him back after a few minutes. Nothing. The line was busy, and then the call cut off. I tried a message. There was no answer either. The rest of the morning passed with an unease I could not name. I tried to distract myself. I washed the dishes, cleaned the porch, read the newspaper headlines. But the conversation repeated in my head, over and over, with that question suspended in the air. Did you eat the chocolates? At noon I heard the sound of an engine approaching. For an instant I thought it was him. I looked out the window, but it was only the mailman. I went down the stairs, signed the receipt, and he handed me an envelope with the bank logo. I opened it right there, under the sun. Inside was a notification. Recent access to the joint account I had shared with Thomas years ago, an account I thought was closed. I frowned, confused. Maybe he needed money for something urgent, I thought. Thomas had always had trouble managing his expenses. I did not give it too much importance. At 4 p.m, while I was cleaning the living room windows, the phone rang again. This time it was Laura. Her voice broke before I even understood the words. "Dad," she whispered, "the kids are in the hospital." "What? What happened?" I asked with my heart in my throat. "They say that they got poisoned with the chocolates." The rag fell from my hand. "What chocolates?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "The ones you brought yesterday." I felt the blood drain from my face. "How are they?" I stammered. "I do not know. The doctors are with them. Come quickly." I did not think. I grabbed the keys and ran out. The air outside was heavy, as if the whole world had stopped. I drove without feeling the steering wheel, without looking at traffic lights, with my knuckles white from gripping so hard. The city blurred through the windshield. Memories hit me like waves. Annie's laughter, Ellie's curious eyes, the moment I handed them that box. Everything mixed with the sound of sirens in the distance. When I arrived at the hospital, Laura was in the waiting room, pale with her makeup running from tears. "Where are they?" I asked, breathless. "In the ER. The doctor said it was poisoning, that there was something in the chocolate." I ran out of air. I felt a buzzing in my ears and had to lean against the wall to not fall. The doctor appeared shortly after, with an expression of professional tiredness, but with a hint of gravity in his voice. "They are stable," he said. "The preliminary analysis shows traces of arsenic, but the dose was low. They arrived in time." I had to take a step back. I felt the floor moving. "Arsenic?" I repeated, not understanding. "Yes," nodded the doctor. "Someone mixed it with the filling. If the kids had eaten a little more, we would not be talking." Laura looked at me, eyes red, and whispered, "Dad, Thomas was the one who bought the box, right?" I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was a knot. When I opened it, she said, "I noticed a weird smell, but the kids were so excited I did not want to disappoint them." The doctor added, "We have already sent the samples to the lab. We will have the definitive results tomorrow." I let myself fall onto a bench in the hallway, hands trembling. The noise of footsteps, the beeping of machines, Laura's sobs, everything reached me muffled, as if I were underwater. A nurse approached with a notepad in her hand. "Are you the original recipient of the gift?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. She looked at me in silence for a few seconds. "You were lucky," she said. "If you had eaten them, you would be dead." Her words fell like stones into the void. Laura took out her phone and started dialing desperately. "Thomas, pick up, please," she whispered. "You have to come to the hospital." The tone rang over and over until voicemail interrupted with a brutal silence. Minutes passed that felt like hours to me. Finally, I stood up and walked to the hallway window. Outside, the sun was falling slowly, tinted with a metallic gold that reflected on the parked cars. I felt old, weak, and confused. A police officer approached shortly after. His tone was respectful but direct. "Mr. Miller, we need to record a statement. There are indications of deliberate attempted poisoning." I told him the little I knew, that the box had arrived by courier, that it was addressed to me, that Thomas had bought it. The agent took notes and handed me his card. "If your son gets in touch with you, let us know immediately." When night fell, Laura was still by the door of the kids' room. I watched her from afar, unable to approach. She looked up for a moment, and our eyes met. There were no reproaches, only a shared, heavy fear that neither dared to put into words. I left the hospital almost at midnight. The parking lot was empty, lit by cold lights. I got into the truck and sat for a moment without starting it. A fine drizzle was falling, almost imperceptible, fogging the windshield. I started the engine, moved forward a few meters, and stopped at the edge of the road. I took out my phone, dialed Thomas's number. 1, 2, 3 times. The call went through, rang 3 times, and cut off. I stared at the dark screen. My reflection in the phone glass was that of a man who no longer recognized himself. The wrinkles, the empty eyes, the rigid expression. I do not know how long I stayed like that, listening to the sound of the idling engine. A part of me was still hoping it was all a mistake, a coincidence, an absurd nightmare. But deep down, very deep down, something had broken forever. That night, while I drove back home, the silence was unbearable. Neither the radio nor the engine noise managed to distract me from the weight of a single idea that hammered without rest. My own son had sent me the poison that almost killed his children, and although I still had no proof, nor explanation, nor strength to face the truth, I knew it with the icy clarity of someone who feels death brush their shoulder. Nothing in my life would ever be the same again. That night, I barely slept. I closed my eyes and saw the red lights of the hospital again, the distant sound of sirens, Laura's crying, the tiny hands of my grandkids covered in wires. Every time sleep overcame me, the buzzing of an imaginary ambulance woke me up again. The clock marked 3, 4, 5. I got up when it was not yet dawn, with a heavy body and a restless soul. At 5 o'clock sharp, the phone rang on the table. The ring cut through the air. I thought it was the hospital, but looking at the screen, I saw his name. Thomas. I hesitated a second before answering. Dad? His voice was low, almost a whisper. How are the kids? I stayed silent for a moment, waiting for some sign of regret, of humanity in his tone. They are better, I told him with a tired voice. The doctors say it was luck they arrived in time. They are still running tests on the chocolates. The silence on the other end was so long, I heard my own heart beating. Then he spoke again, more tense. Dad, did you eat any? No, I replied coldly. I took them to Laura and the kids. Why do you ask that? I heard his breathing, fast, contained, and then a long exhalation. No, nothing. Just wanted to know, he said, and he hung up. I was left with the phone in my hand, watching the screen turn off. In the kitchen, only the constant noise of the refrigerator was heard, a monotonous hum that drilled into my head. I turned on the coffee maker without thinking, but the aroma of coffee no longer calmed me. I felt that something invisible had broken between us. At 7, I went out to the porch with the hot mug between my hands. Mist covered the street, and the air cut the skin. I sat on the old wooden bench and watched how the coffee steam mixed with the frozen breath of the morning. Mrs. Wilson, my neighbor, appeared crossing the garden, wrapped in a flowered robe. Good morning, Donald, she said, leaning on the fence. Last night I saw police cars in front of your son's house. Is something wrong? I swallowed hard. The kids got poisoned, I answered, but they are out of danger now. Poor little things, she murmured, lowering her voice. The Thomas has not looked well lately. I saw him a few days ago at the store with dark circles under his eyes, smoking like a chimney. I did not know what to say. I nodded, faking a smile. But inside, something was fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. Every gesture, every silence of Thomas in the last few months began to have another meaning. I went back inside and turned on the radio to distract myself, but the words mixed without sense. I spent the morning moving aimlessly. I organized papers on the desk, cleaned the air filter, tried to occupy my hands so my mind would not sink. Around noon, the phone rang again. It was Laura. Her voice sounded exhausted, rough from crying so much. Dad, I have the results. What did they say? I asked, feeling a coldness in my stomach. It is arsenic, she replied. The doctors are sure they found it in the chocolates. I closed my eyes. Does the police know anything? They are investigating the origin. They said they are going to the shop in Manhattan, from where it was sent. They also want to talk to you. I looked around. Light came through the curtain, falling on the floor like a yellow line dividing the room into two halves, what was before and what was now. Not much time passed until the doorbell rang. Upon opening, I found a young man, tall in a dark coat. "Officer Dan," he said, showing his badge. "We need to ask you some questions, Mr. Miller." I invited him in. He sat in front of me at the dining table and turned on his recorder. "Can you tell me from the beginning how you received the package?" I recounted everything. The courier, the box, the card, how I took it to Thomas and Laura's house. He took notes without interrupting me, with a neutral expression. "Do you suspect anyone?" he asked finally. I stood thinking. "I do not know," I said slowly. "But my son, when he found out I had not eaten the chocolates, seemed scared." The officer looked up. "Scared?" "Yes. Not angry?" "No. Surprised. Scared." He noted something else and nodded. "We will verify who paid for the order and from what account. We will keep you informed." When he left, the house went silent again. I was left alone with the echo of my own words. I went to the sideboard, took out the birthday card, and observed it again. To the best father in the world. The clean, orderly handwriting without a tremor. It did not look like the hand of someone planning to harm. But the facts did not lie. The phone rang again. This time, it was the bank. "Mr. Miller, we are calling to confirm a recent withdrawal of $15,000 from an account linked to your name." "There must be a mistake," I said. "That account is closed." "No, sir. According to our records, you authorized your son Thomas Miller as a co-holder in 2012. The account is still active." I felt a pang in my chest. "I understand," I murmured and hung up. I went to the study, opened the drawer of old documents. The dust made me cough. Among receipts and folders, I found the bank contract. My signature and his, younger, more trusting. I remembered the day we opened it. For emergencies, I told him then. Now I understood that the emergency was me. The rest of the afternoon passed with a mixture of rage and confusion. I could not concentrate. I walked through the house like a ghost. At 6, I decided to go to the hospital. The pediatric hallway smelled of disinfectant. Annie slept with her mouth half open. Ellie watched a cartoon in silence. They had pale skin, small veins under the IV tape. Laura was next to them with a blanket over her shoulders. "Thanks for coming, Dad," she whispered. "How are they?" "Tired, but out of danger. The doctors say they will recover." "And Thomas?" I asked. She lowered her gaze. "He is not showing up. The police went to the house. His car is still there, but he is not. His phone is off." I sat next to her. Neither of us spoke for a while. I looked at my sleeping grandkids and felt something inside me harden. It was not just fear. It was fury. "If you see him, let me know," I told her finally. When I left the hospital, the sky was already dyed violet. The wind moved the bare branches, and the air smelled of gasoline and old rain. I walked toward the parking lot with slow steps. My mind would not stop. Reaching the car, I dialed my sister's number, Natalie. She answered on the second ring with a sleepy voice. "Donald? What is wrong? Have you seen Thomas?" I asked directly. There was a brief silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I think so. He arrived last night. He is here, at my house." He did not want to say much, just that he needed to rest. I stood still, phone pressed against my ear. "Listen to me, Natalie," I said calmly, although I felt my blood burning. "Do not let him leave. Do not tell him I spoke to you. I am coming over. Donald, what is happening? Please, just do what I tell you." I hung up before she kept asking. I got into the car and started the engine. The city lights reflected on the wet windshield. While I advanced down the road, the sky darkened completely, and the headlights projected a tunnel of light into the fog. I did not think about what I would say or do. I only had one certainty. Something had broken irreparably between father and son. The steering wheel trembled under my hands. The sound of the engine mixed with my ragged breathing. At every traffic light, I saw my reflection in the glass. An older man, tired, with the face of someone going straight toward a truth he does not want to know. When I took the detour toward the road that led to my sister's house, the last ray of sun disappeared behind the trees. The sky was dyed a dirty gray, and a cold, almost mechanical thought crossed my mind. This time I will not go to ask. I will go to hear the truth. The road to Natalie's house was long and silent. Night fell slowly, covering the landscape with a layer of low fog that spread across the road like a gray veil. The noise of the engine was the only sound keeping me awake. Halfway there, I stopped at a gas station. I needed air. I needed to think. While filling the tank, I dialed the number of Stanley, my lifelong friend, a lawyer for 30 years. He answered with a drowsy voice. "Donald, what time is it?" "Almost 9, I said. "I need you to tell me something frankly. If someone tries to poison another person, how is that classified?" There was a brief silence. "Depends on the intent," he replied. "But if there is proof of premeditation, that is first-degree attempted murder." His tone was dry, professional, but underneath, the confusion was noticeable. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I think my son wanted to kill me," I said with a low voice. Stanley did not answer immediately. "Donald, say nothing more over the phone. Save everything you have. I will handle the rest." I hung up without answering. I finished filling the tank and noticed my hand was trembling when I returned the nozzle. The wind blew strong when I got back on the road. At every curve, fear oppressed my chest a little more. The headlight beams barely cut the darkness. When I finally arrived, it was almost 10. Natalie's house hid among the pines, small with a warm light coming out of the living room window. I parked a little further ahead and turned off the engine. Thomas's car was there, dark, with the hood still warm. I walked to the door, went up the wooden steps, and rang the bell. Natalie opened right away. Her face was pale, eyes swollen as if she had cried. "Is he here?" I asked bluntly. She nodded, avoiding looking at me directly. "In the living room." "He is weird, Donald. He does not want to talk to anyone." I walked down the hall, and there he was. Thomas sitting on the sofa with his head down, his gray jacket wrinkled, phone still in his hand. He looked up, and for an instant I saw the child who used to run through the garden again with his face full of mud and a clumsy smile. But that shine in his eyes no longer existed. We stood in silence for a few seconds. The ticking of the clock filled the space like a knife. "Why did you not go to the hospital?" I asked finally. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "I could not, or would not," I replied. "No, you do not understand," he said, lowering his voice. "Everything got out of control." Natalie approached, trying to soften the tone. "Please calm down, both of you." I ignored her attempt. I took out of my pocket the card that came with the box of chocolates and held it up in front of his face. "You wrote this, right?" He did not answer. He lowered his gaze. "Thomas," I insisted, "tell me the truth." Some eternal seconds passed before he opened his mouth. "Because you never knew when you should disappear from my life," he said, with a coldness that cut my breath. I was left speechless. "What did you say?" "You have lived too long, Dad. I needed that money. I knew what you keep in the bank. The 200,000 you never planned to use." "Thomas," Natalie screamed, covering her mouth with her hands, but he kept talking, almost without blinking. "All my life I have been under your shadow, always with your advice, your criticism, your rules. I wanted a chance to breathe for myself. I stared at him, and that chance was killing me." He pursed his lips. "You were not going to die immediately. Arsenic in small doses causes cardiac arrest, and nobody would have noticed." Natalie broke down crying. "My God, Thomas, what did you do?" I took a step toward him without raising my voice. "Your children ate those chocolates. They were on the brink of death." Thomas looked at me with a mixture of rage and fear. "If you had not taken the box to their house, none of this would have happened. So the fault is mine?" I said, incredulous. He took a step back, breathing with difficulty. You always ruin everything, Dad. Always sticking your nose where it does not belong. Silence fell over the room again. The clock kept marking the seconds. From the hallway door, I heard a slight noise. Turning, I saw Laura standing there, pale, trembling, with her hospital jacket still on. Thomas. Her voice was barely a thread. It is true what I just heard. Thomas turned slowly. You do not know what you are talking about. Nobody died. It was all a mistake. Laura looked at him with a mixture of horror and repulsion. You tried to kill your father, and you almost killed your children. How can you call yourself a human being? He raised his hands, desperate. It was not like that. I wanted to fix it. Everything went wrong. You are a monster, she screamed, tears falling down her face. I said nothing. I limited myself to observing him. Thomas seemed to shrink before our eyes, as if the weight of his own axe crushed him. His shoulders slumped, his gaze empty. What are you going to do now? He asked me at last with a resigned tone. I am going to do what any father whom his son has betrayed would do, I answered. He held my gaze for just a second, then looked away. Natalie sobbed in a corner. Laura, motionless like a statue of salt. Nobody moved. I turned around and walked toward the door. Every step weighed on me as if I were carrying years of disappointment in my feet. Before leaving, I stopped for an instant and spoke without turning. Pray that the kids recover, because if they do not, no lawyer will save you. I left. The cold night air hit my face. The trees swayed with a rasping sound like a lament. I got into the car, turned on the lights. Through the windshield I could see Thomas's silhouette in the window, still not moving, while shadows wrapped around him. I started the engine and moved slowly down the road. My hands were still trembling, but it was no longer fear. It was something deeper, darker. In the rearview mirror, the light of Natalie's house became smaller and smaller until it disappeared. I felt something inside me also turning off with it. While driving, I remembered every instant of his childhood. The nights I took care of him when he had a fever, the times I taught him to ride a bike, the Sundays we went fishing at the river. All that was crumbling now turned into ruins. When I reached the main intersection, I turned off the engine for a moment. Absolute silence wrapped me. On the passenger seat, the card was still there, wrinkled, with the words that no longer meant anything. To the best father in the world. I clenched my fists. I was not going to let this end in darkness, with excuses or tears. There were 2 innocent children in a hospital and a lost son who needed to face justice. I started the car again. The night was dense, starless. On the way back, my reflection in the mirror returned an image I did not recognize. A tired man, but determined. The compassionate father had died in that house. What remained now was someone different, harder, clearer, a man who did not seek revenge, but proof and justice. I drove all night. The road seemed endless, a gray ribbon losing itself in the mist. The dashboard clock marked 3, then 4. I stopped at a service station that barely lit the asphalt with its yellowish light. There was no one, just a truck parked in the distance. I stayed inside the car for a moment, without turning off the engine, observing my reflection in the rearview mirror. An old man, tired, with empty eyes. I took out a cigarette. I had not smoked for almost 10 years since the doctor forbade it. After a mild heart attack, I lit it anyway. The first drag burned my lungs and filled me with a bitter taste, like rusty iron. Outside, the lights of a trailer passed slowly, reflecting on the windshield and crossing my face. It was the first time in a long while that I felt afraid of being alive. I picked up the phone and opened the voice recorder. I started speaking in a low voice, with the calm of someone who does not want to forget anything. I recorded everything. Thomas's call, his words, his confession, the reactions, the names, every detail. In case something happens to me, I murmured, and saved the file with the day's date. When the sky began to clear, I returned home. Dawn arrived cold with that blue light that precedes the sun. I put water to heat, made a double coffee, and sat in front of the computer. My email had more than 20 new messages from the bank. Suspicious activity detected in your account. Unrecognized automatic transfers. Confirmation of recent movements. I opened each one, printed the documents, and stored them in an old cardboard folder. At 8, I called Stanley. I need advice, I told him. I want to know what premeditated attempted murder implies. There was a silence on the other end. Donald, are you joking? No, not this time. He did not insist. He said he would stop by my house that same afternoon. I spent the following hours organizing everything. Emails, bills, photos Robert had sent me before about Thomas and his messy life. I reviewed every detail, every bank movement. The exact sum withdrawn matched the amount Thomas mentioned that night. The proof was in front of me, but there was no satisfaction, only an icy void in my chest. At 5, Stanley arrived with his black briefcase and a laptop. We sat at the dining table. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he asked. I recounted every step, from the arrival of the package to Thomas's confession. He listened in silence, taking notes. Then he stared at me, fixedly. "Do you have witnesses?" "Laura," I replied. "She heard everything." "Perfect," he said, nodding. "With that and the call log, we can move forward." He took a card from his pocket and handed it to me. "I am going to contact Robert Talls, a trusted private investigator. If your son moves, he will know." That same night, the phone rang. It was Robert, with a hoarse and direct voice. "I need Thomas's information, car license plate, phone number, bank, work, everything you have." I sent him the data instantly. Trying to clear my head, I went out to buy new padlocks. At the hardware store, the clerk looked at me weirdly when I asked for security locks for all doors. "Problems, Mr. Miller?" "Just precaution," I replied. Back home, my neighbor Fletcher saw me installing a new bolt. "What is wrong, Donald? You look exhausted." "Family matters," I said. Nothing more. That night I slept little. I left the porch light on and the door secured. At 3 a.m, I thought I heard the noise of a car stopping outside. I drew the curtain, only the red flash of a taillight that disappeared around the corner. 3 days later, Robert appeared with a thick envelope. "Here is what we found," he said, leaving the package on the table. Inside were printed photographs. In the first one, Thomas was at the Golden Lucky Casino, with a glass in his hand and a lost expression. In the second, he was signing a paper with a hefty man in a black jacket. "That is Rico Hernandez," Robert explained, "owner of the casino. Thomas owes him more than $50,000. Stanley, who was with me, leaned toward the photos. Then the economic motive is clear. He wanted his father's money. I nodded, and we already have enough evidence to prove it was not an accident. The next day we went to the bank together. We wanted the original records of the transfers. A young employee, nervous, checked her screen and said, "You will need a court order to access that data." Stanley smiled humorlessly. "Do not worry. You will have it tomorrow." That afternoon I classified everything. Copies of emails, bills, photos, even my voice recording. I made a list of dates and times. Everything in order, as if I were preparing a legal file. At 9 at night, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I opened the message and read, "Shut up, old man. You do not know who you are messing with." I stared at it for a long time. I did not tell anyone. At dawn, I forwarded it to Robert. "Coming from a burner number," he told me a few hours later. "But we tracked the origin. A signal tower near your son's neighborhood." I felt a chill run down my back. "Then they are watching me." "Possibly," he said. "Stay alert." That night, the silence in the house was so thick I could hear the wood creaking. Every noise made me turn my head. I went to the entrance, took the old baseball bat I had kept since the 70s, and leaned it next to the door. I turned on all the exterior lights and sat on the sofa, never taking my eyes off the window. I spent the time like that until dawn. The next day I went to the hospital. Annie and Ellie were better. They had color back in their cheeks and a weak but true smile. When they saw me enter, they raised their hands to wave. "Grandpa," said Annie. I pressed my lips together so my voice would not break. "You two are brave ones," I told them, stroking their hair. Laura came out to the hallway with me. She looked thinner, dark circles marked. "The police still have not found Thomas," she whispered. "He disappeared." I handed her the envelope Robert had given me. "Keep this," I asked her. "If something happens to me, take it directly to the police." She took it with trembling hands. "I will, Dad. I promise." Leaving the hospital, I felt someone was watching me. A few meters away, a man in a dark coat stood next to a lamppost. He was doing nothing, just looking at me. When I took a step toward him, he turned and disappeared among the cars. I took out my phone. "Robert," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady, "I think Rico knows we are after him." "I assume so," he answered. "He is dangerous. Watch your back, Donald. Now it is no longer just about justice. It is about surviving." That night I sat at my desk, turned on the lamp, and opened the notebook where I had started writing everything. I noted every detail of the day, the calls, the faces, the places. When I reached the last line, I hesitated a few seconds before writing. The pen trembled between my fingers. Tonight, darkness no longer hides the truth. It shows it as it is, cruel, inevitable, and mine. I closed the notebook. Outside, the wind hit the windows. For the first time in weeks, I did not turn on the radio or the television. I stayed listening to the silence, knowing that from that moment on, there was no turning back. At 8 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked on the door. I had not slept well. The previous night had been long and full of thoughts that would not stop. When I opened it, Robert was there, soaked by the drizzle, with a thick folder under his arm and a flash drive in his hand. "I bring something you need to see," he said without preamble. He entered, left his coat on the chair, and placed the photos on the dining table. In them, my son Thomas appeared in a dark parking lot, next to a hefty man in a leather jacket. In one of the images, Thomas was handing him an envelope. In another, the man was counting it with a cold expression. "Money to pay his debt," Robert said, observing me. "I'm almost sure it came out of the account he emptied." I stared at the photograph without saying a word. There was something in Thomas's posture that hurt me more than his betrayal, the way his body seemed small, defeated, as if he no longer had a soul. Shortly after, Stanley arrived with his briefcase and serious face. He opened his laptop, connected the flash drive, and showed me a video recorded by Robert. In the recording, Thomas spoke fast, nervous, looking sideways. "It has to be done soon before my father changes his mind." I recognized his voice instantly. I felt a sharp blow to the chest, but I did not move. I held the coffee mug with both hands. While the liquid trembled inside, Stanley closed the computer with a snap. "We already have everything necessary to press charges," he said, "but I want to do it right, publicly, without hiding anything." I frowned. "Publicly?" "Yes. The press can protect you more than any lawyer. If everyone knows your story, Thomas and those behind him won't be able to silence you." I shook my head. "I do not want this to be a spectacle. He is my son." Stanley looked at me with patience, and he also tried to kill you. "Do not forget that." He kept silent for a few seconds and added, "I know a journalist from the local channel. She does reports on domestic violence and family crimes. If she covers your case, no one will be able to manipulate the story." I agreed, albeit reluctantly. I felt I was handing my privacy over to the world, but I understood there was no longer space for silence. The next day, a van with the channel logo parked in front of my house. 2 technicians installed cameras and lights in the living room. The journalist, Sarah Grant, greeted me with respect in a soft voice. "Mr. Miller, we do not want to re-victimize you. We want people to understand what has happened." I nodded. When the camera turned on, I simply told the truth. I did not cry. I did not try to embellish anything. I narrated every fact calmly. The box of chocolates, the call, the confession. At the end, Sarah lowered her voice and asked, "Do you still consider Thomas your son?" "He always will be," I said. but I am no longer the same father he knew. The program aired that same night. In a matter of hours, my phone did not stop ringing. Neighbors, former co-workers, even people from the next town over wanted to know more. I did not answer anyone. I sat in front of the TV, watching how my story unfolded on the screen, as if it belonged to another man. The images showed Thomas's face, Laura's, the hospital, and the box of chocolates in evidence. The journalist narrated with a firm voice, "A 69-year-old father survives the attempted murder by his own son." When the report ended, silence wrapped around me. The phone rang one more time. It was Laura, crying, "Thank you, Dad. Thank you." Now everyone knows the truth? I could not answer. I felt a huge weight on my chest, a mixture of relief and sadness. That same night, Stanley called me. The police already issued the arrest warrant. Thomas is being sought. 3 days later, the ringing of the phone woke me. "Mr. Miller," said a male voice, "this is Lieutenant Collins. We have the suspect in custody. He was detained at a motel near the New Jersey border." I stayed silent for a few seconds. "Are my grandkids okay?" I asked finally. "Perfectly," responded the officer. "They are out of danger." I hung up and stared at the phone, turning off. I felt no joy nor revenge, only a strange calm, as if something inevitable had come to an end. In the afternoon, I met with Stanley in his office. On the table was a thick envelope. "Here you have it," he said, handing it to me. "It is the official copy of the file. State of New Jersey versus Thomas Miller." I read the document slowly. Seeing my son's name under the word defendant froze my blood. Stanley watched me with a compassionate expression. "From now on, everything will be resolved within the law," he said. At that moment, Robert entered, with disheveled hair and a tired smile. "Rico has disappeared," he announced. "But do not worry. We are tracking his movements." "Leave it," I said, raising my hand. "I do not care where he is. The only thing I want is justice." That night, I returned home under a fine rain. The wind hit the branches against the windows. I turned on the TV. My interview was appearing on the news. The anchor spoke of me as if I were a symbol, the man who survived his own son's poison. I turned off the screen. I stared at the darkness beyond the glass. Outside, the rain fell constantly, softly, as if the sky was trying to clean the earth of all that human misery. A few minutes later, someone knocked on the door. It was Mrs. Wilson, my neighbor. She brought a tray of warm pie wrapped in aluminum foil. "The whole neighborhood is with you, Donald," she said with a sad smile. "No one deserves to go through something like that." I thanked her and said goodbye. "Maybe for the first time in my life," I replied. "Loneliness has served for something." When I closed the door, I checked the locks, turned off the hallway lights, and stored the documents in the strongbox in the closet. The house smelled of dampness and metal. Almost at midnight, I heard a slight tapping. I thought it was the wind, but it sounded again. I got up and turned on the porch light. There was no one, just an envelope someone had slid under the door. I picked it up carefully. Inside was a photograph. Me sitting in the hospital room next to Annie and Ellie. On the back, a phrase written in black ink. "Do not think this is over." My heart skipped a beat. I picked up the phone and dialed Robert's number. He answered on the second ring. "I will be there in 20 minutes, he said before I could explain. He kept his word. He arrived soaked, examined the photo under the kitchen light. "Rico, or someone from his crew," he murmured. "They want to scare you, make you think they still have power." "And now what do I do?" I asked. Robert smiled, humorlessly. "Now nothing. You are no longer the victim, Donald. Now you are the man they should fear." I looked toward the window. Outside, the wind dragged the rain like needles on the glass. I felt something new inside me. It was not fear, nor rage, nor pain. It was a cold, decided calm. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to my desk. In the notebook where I kept my notes, I wrote a single line. "This story does not end until the fear changes owners." That night, I understood that the weak father, The man who trembled before his son's betrayal no longer existed. In his place was another, one willing to look darkness in the face and not look away. 3 days after Thomas's arrest, I received a call from the police. Lieutenant Collins informed me that I had to appear at the station to sign the official confirmation of my testimony. His voice sounded polite, but loaded with that gravity that accompanies truths impossible to ignore. I arrived at the building under a persistent drizzle, with my old umbrella that still held rust stains on the handle. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline. I went up the steps slowly. Every step resonated as if marking the rhythm of something that could no longer be stopped. In the interrogation room, Collins received me with a serious gesture. On the table were several sealed folders and a series of photographs. He offered me a seat, then opened one of them and slid the images toward me. They were the remains of the chocolates, carefully packaged in transparent bags with numbered labels. In another photo, a small dark glass bottle was seen with a partially torn label. Arsenic trioxide. "We found it in your son's garage," said Collins. "We also tracked the purchase of the chocolates. It was ordered online with Thomas's credit card. The delivery was the same day as your birthday." I nodded wordlessly. I had prepared myself to hear it, but not to feel that weight in my chest. That silence that crushes everything. Collins continued. "There is something else. On his computer, we found a document called Financial Plan 2024 .xls. Inside, a tab was titled Assets Following Father's Death. It includes inheritance calculations, projection of accounts, and even a note. Priority, cancel, Rico, debt. I closed my eyes for a moment. I gripped the pen so hard it cracked. Then I signed every sheet of the report, with handwriting trembling, but firm. Leaving the station, I saw Robert waiting for me under a black umbrella. His coat was dripping water, and in the other hand he held a folded newspaper. He showed it to me without a word. On the front page it read, "Son poisons father to pay off gambling debts." Below, a photograph of Thomas handcuffed, with an empty gaze and hair stuck to his face. I observed it for a long time, trying to find in that face the child who once ran after me in the park, who laughed when I taught him to throw a ball. But he was no longer there. The man in the photo was a stranger. "Rico is still missing," murmured Robert, but they caught one of his men. He confessed that Thomas still owed him $15,000. I nodded without looking at him. The words seemed to float in the air, hollow, unreal. We went together to Stanley's office. There were piles of folders on the desk, each marked with labels. Bank fraud, attempted homicide, photographic evidence. "We have to file the civil lawsuit," Stanley said. "There's already enough evidence. Illicit transfers, attempted murder, misappropriation of funds." "What is missing then?" I asked. "Laura's statement. Her testimony will close the circle." That same afternoon I went to see her. The house smelled of disinfectant and sadness. The children's toys were scattered on the living room rug. When I opened the door, Annie ran toward me and hugged my legs. "Grandpa, when is Daddy coming back?" I crouched down, stroking her hair. "Not soon, my love, but everything will be fine." Laura appeared with tired eyes, holding a cup of tea. "I have filed for divorce," she said bluntly. "I cannot keep defending him." I nodded in silence. There was a sad, resigned calm in her voice. "Stanley will need you to testify," I told her. "I will do it," she responded. "I want my children to grow up knowing the truth." We stayed for a moment watching the rain fall through the window without speaking. At some point I understood that neither of us sought justice for revenge. It was something simpler. We needed to recover peace. That night, back home, the phone rang. It was Robert. "They caught him," he said with a low voice. Rico was detained in Philadelphia. He confessed that Thomas asked him for help to get arsenic through a man named Carlos, a Mexican resident in Newark. I noted everything in my notebook: time, place, names. The habit of recording every detail had become a way of breathing. The next morning, I received an email from a journalist organization. They invited me to a televised forum on family violence and financial greed. Stanley insisted I accept. It is time for people to see that you are not just a victim, Donald. You are a survivor. I agreed. The event took place in the local channel's auditorium. The lights were strong, almost blinding. When they gave me the microphone, I told the story from the beginning, without embellishments. Sometimes, I said, looking at the audience, betrayal does not come from an enemy, but from whom one taught to walk. The silence that followed was more eloquent than applause. At the end, several people approached to shake my hand. An older woman told me, with tears in her eyes, "You're not alone. My son tried to keep my house. I thought it was my fault." I responded with a slight gesture. For the first time, I understood that my story was that of many others, just with different names. On the way back, Robert drove. He showed me a new file on his tablet, the recordings from the Golden Lucky Casino. In one of them, Thomas received an envelope from Rico's hands. In the corner of the envelope, there was a visible stain. Later, it would be confirmed that it contained his fingerprint. When Stanley saw the images, he smiled, with a mixture of tiredness and satisfaction. Perfect. This will destroy him in court. That night, while the clock marked almost midnight, I wrote a letter to the public defender assigned to Thomas. I did not want meetings, nor apologies, nor mediations. I only asked that the case follow its course to the end. Before sleeping, I turned on the TV. On the nightly news, they showed images of Thomas being transferred from the detention center to the county jail. Camera lights flashed while journalists shouted questions. He lowered his head, handcuffed, surrounded by police. I turned off the device. I went to the window and drew the curtains. Outside, it was raining again, a constant, soft rain that hit the glass like a whisper. I rested my forehead on the glass. For the first time in many months, I felt something resembling peace. It was not joy. It was a silent relief, as if the rain, with its infinite patience, washed away all the rot that had been left behind. I took a deep breath and turned off the light. In the darkness, I thought of only one thing. You cannot choose blood, but you can choose what you do with it. And that night, finally, I chose to keep living. A week later, Stanley called me early in the morning. His voice sounded firm, professional, but I perceived a nuance of worry. "We already have the date," he said. Monday, 9 in the morning, the county courthouse. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the inevitable. I ironed my old gray suit, the one I still kept from the time I taught at the university. I polished my shoes until I saw my tired reflection in them. At night, I left everything on the bedroom chair and sat in front of the mirror, reviewing the words I did not want to forget. Not hate, not revenge, only justice. Monday dawned with a sky of low clouds. In front of the courthouse there were cameras, journalists, curious onlookers. When I got out of the car, flashes began to explode like lightning. "Mr. Miller," shouted a reporter, "will you forgive your son?" I stopped for a second, looked directly at the nearest lens, and responded slowly. "I do not seek to forgive nor punish. I only want the truth." Inside the building, the air smelled of damp paper and old coffee. Thomas was already there, sitting next to his public defender. He had grown out hair, a messy beard, and sunken eyes. His handcuffed hands rested on the table. He seemed younger, and, at the same time, infinitely older. I sat at the back, next to Laura and Robert, who held his camera as if it were a shield. When the judge entered, everyone stood up. Then the prosecutor began reading the charges. Attempted first-degree murder, premeditated poisoning, financial fraud. Every word resonated on the walls like a dry blow. Thomas raised his head, and for an instant his gaze crossed with mine. There was no rage nor regret, only a void I did not know how to interpret. The prosecutor presented the evidence one by one. The receipt for the arsenic purchase, the emails, Robert's recording, Rico's testimony. Stanley stood up, also showing the birthday card and the messages Thomas sent me that morning. The whole room kept silent. When Laura was called to the stand, she took a deep breath before speaking. I heard with my own ears how Thomas confessed, she said with a trembling voice. He said he had put the poison in the chocolates, so his father would eat them. A murmur ran through the room. Thomas moved his lips, muttering something unintelligible, and a guard had to push him gently back into his seat. The prosecutor concluded with a phrase that was left floating in the air. There is no debt nor desperation that justifies killing the one who gave you life. The hearing lasted all day. When the judge announced that the sentence would be postponed for a week, I felt time stopping again. We left at dusk. The rain was starting to fall again. Journalists waited outside, microphones and lights pointing toward me. Stanley put an arm around me to clear a path. You did the right thing, he whispered to me. Sometimes dignity is also defended in public. At home, I turned on the TV. On the local news, they broadcast a fragment of my arrival at the courthouse. At the bottom of the screen ran a headline. The father who faced his son, symbol of delayed justice. I turned down the volume and observed my own image in silence, moving like a ghost inside the luminous rectangle. The next day, letters began to arrive. Some were short, just a line of encouragement. I admire your bravery. Others were long, stories of fathers, mothers, grandparents betrayed by their own children. I read them all. There was a strange solidarity in shared pain. A New York newspaper wrote to me. They wanted to publish a column of mine about parents who discover too late who their children are. I accepted. I spent the whole night writing. I did not seek drama or compassion, only honesty. I titled the article, No One Really Knows Their Son Till They See Him in Front of a Judge. 3 days later, the text appeared on the digital front page. Thousands of comments, messages, hands extended in words. Laura called me that night. Dad, everyone is on our side. I smiled slightly, although my voice sounded tired. This is not a victory, daughter. It is a lesson written in blood. On Friday, Robert arrived with a new file. He inserted a USB drive into my computer. On the screen appeared Thomas, sitting in the interrogation room. The video was recent. An agent off camera asked him why he had done it. Thomas looked at the floor and replied, I just wanted to be free. My father never let me be myself. I lived my whole life under his shadow. The silence that followed hit me more than any insult. Robert turned off the recording. He feels no guilt, Donald, he said, only resentment. Some men prefer to blame others before looking in the mirror. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the blank screen. It was strange. I felt compassion for that boy who no longer existed, but not for the man who had tried to kill me. A week later, the trial resumed. This time, the room was fuller. There were TV cameras, journalists from New York, curious people from all over the state. When the judge took his seat, the murmurs ceased. The prosecutor spoke first, listing evidence and testimonies. Then Thomas's lawyer tried to present him as a confused man, victim of stress, debts, family pressure. But the evidence was too solid. The judge asked for silence and read the verdict. Guilty of attempted homicide and financial fraud, sentenced to 12 years in prison without the right to bail. Thomas stood up slowly. He looked around, his eyes lost, without tears. Then he lowered his head and let himself be taken by the guards. I did not applaud. I did not cry. I only stood up, gave a slight bow to the judge, and left the room. In the hallway, Laura hugged me tightly. Dad, it is over, she whispered. I nodded, but inside me something remained unresolved. Maybe forgiveness, maybe silence. Journalists surrounded me again. A voice asked from the back, Mr. Miller, do you still consider Thomas your son? I responded slowly, choosing every word. Yes, but he is only the son of the man I was. That afternoon I returned home. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. I entered the living room and observed the old family photograph hanging on the wall. Thomas, Laura, the kids, and me, all smiling at a summer barbecue. I took it down carefully, placed it inside a wooden box, and stored it in the closet. I turned on the porch light and stood watching the horizon. The night was clear, the air calm. For the first time, I felt neither fear nor pain. Only a new peace, cold but real. Out there somewhere, my son slept between concrete walls, and I, in my empty house, understood that true justice does not always bring comfort. Sometimes it only leaves space so silence finally can breathe. 3 days after the sentence, I received a call from the police department. Lieutenant Collins asked me to stop by the county office to sign the final documents related to the seizure of Thomas's assets. His voice, always firm, this time had an almost compassionate tone, as if he too sought to close the chapter. I arrived early. The gray sky covered the administrative building like a wet blanket, and in front of the entrance there were several journalists stationed with cameras. I felt the flashes before hearing their voices. "Mr. Miller, any statement on the sentence? Will you forgive your son?" I lowered my head without stopping and pushed the glass door. Collins received me with a handshake. "Thanks for coming, Mr. Miller. The case is practically closed. Only the last formalities remain." On his desk was a thick folder sealed with red tapes. He opened it and took out a transparent envelope with a photograph inside. The family photo Thomas used to have on his desk. Me with him as a child, smiling under the sun. Now it was labeled as Evidence 14C. "We found it among his personal belongings," explained Collins. "I assumed you would want to keep it." I took the photograph and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I said nothing. The lieutenant continued. "Rico pled guilty. He said your son paid him with the money, withdrawn from your accounts. We are preparing the restitution of funds." "Leave it for court costs," I replied. "I do not want any of that anymore." I left the building as the rain began to fall again. In the parking lot, I recognized Laura's car. She was standing next to the vehicle, and the kids were playing in the back seat. When she saw me, she smiled with that mixture of sadness and strength that only a mother can have. "Dad, we wanted to thank you," she said. "Annie is recovered, and Ellie will return to school next week." I leaned down, took 2 small packages from my pocket, a toy car and a teddy bear. "They are for them," I said. "It is not much, but I thought they would be excited." Annie hugged the bear tightly. "Grandpa, when is Daddy coming back?" she asked, looking at me with those same eyes Thomas had as a child. I smiled weakly. "Your dad needs time. Sometimes, to understand what we did, we have to stay alone for a good while." Laura lowered her gaze, holding back tears. "I will tell them the truth, but without hate," she whispered. "That is the right thing," I replied, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Hate only poisons what is already broken." That afternoon, Stanley called me to his office. On the desk were piles of documents, folders marked with court stamps. Robert was there, reviewing some printouts. On the top of the file it read, "Miller versus S. Miller. Civil action for fraud and attempted homicide." Stanley adjusted his glasses and looked at me seriously. "This case will be emblematic. If we win, it will set a precedent. Institutions will have to protect the elderly better against family financial abuse." I took the pen and signed without hesitation. There was no longer room for doubt. When I stood up, Robert handed me a small USB device. "Here are all the original proofs," he said. "Keep them in case someday someone tries to rewrite history. Let your version remain." I stored the device in my pocket next to the photograph. Arriving home, I turned on the kitchen lights. Solitude had a particular sound in that house. The ticking of the clock, the creaking of the woods, the hum of the refrigerator. I turned on the laptop, connected the USB, and copied all the content onto an external hard drive that I kept in a metal box. Then, in the corner of the screen, a new notification appeared. "Inmate Thomas Miller. Message request." For several seconds I hesitated. In the end I clicked. There were only a few lines written clumsily. "Father, I am sorry. I do not know why I did it. I was afraid. I was lost. I wish I could undo it all. Forgive me." I stared at the text for a long time without moving a muscle. The rage I had felt so many times was no longer there. Only an immense tiredness remained, a sadness that did not hurt, But Wade, I wrote a brief response. You do not need to apologize. Live long enough to understand what that means. I did not send the message immediately. I saved it as a draft and closed the laptop. The next morning, the sky dawned clear. I went out to walk to the old corner cafe, the same one where Thomas and I used to sit when he was a student. The aroma of roasted coffee brought me back for a moment to those simpler years. Marta, the usual waitress, recognized me right away. I saw your interview on television, she said, serving my coffee. Your son, what a huge tragedy. I smiled barely. We were all victims of the same blindness, Marta. No one sees darkness coming when it is inside the house. I paid the bill and left. I walked to the park where a group of kids played soccer on the wet grass. Their laughter filled the cold morning air. I stayed there a while, watching. I thought of Annie and Ellie, of how they would grow up knowing the truth, but without letting resentment steal their childhood. That afternoon, while the sun hid behind the trees, the phone rang. It was Stanley. Donald, we just received the ruling, he announced with contained emotion. We won the civil case. The court awards you full ownership of the remaining assets. I stayed quiet for a moment, then responded, Good. I know what I will do with that money. I hung up and went to the desk. I turned on the computer, opened the email, and selected the draft I had left pending. I read it one more time, took a deep breath, and finally pressed send. A small sound confirmed that the message had departed, traveling toward the prison where my son would serve his sentence. I turned off the screen and looked out the window. The evening sky was dyed orange and violet, a calm I did not remember feeling in a long time. For the first time, I understood that truth does not always destroy. Sometimes it simply puts things in their place. That night, I slept with the photograph on the nightstand. It was not forgiveness I felt, nor oblivion. It was something deeper, something that perhaps resembled peace. The case, the headlines, the trials, everything would remain in the county archives. But the true sentence was written elsewhere, inside me, and it was definitive. 6 months after the case closed definitively, I found myself standing on a small podium in the New York Municipal Auditorium. Behind me, a blue sign with silver letters said, Donald Foundation Inauguration. The stage lights blinded me a little, and the murmur of the audience faded until only my voice remained. This foundation, I said, is dedicated to elderly fathers and mothers who have been betrayed, abandoned, or deceived by those they loved most. No one should die in loneliness, nor feel like a burden forgotten by the world. The silence broke with a long, sincere applause. Some attendees stood up. Cameras flashed over and over. In the first row was Laura, with Annie and Ellie sitting next to her. The three smiled at me. For an instant, I felt time rolling back to the days when we all believed in a future without shadows. After the ceremony, a young journalist approached, microphone in hand. Mr. Miller, what led you to create this foundation? I looked at her, breathed slowly, and responded, because I do not want hate to be the last thing my son leaves me as an inheritance. The next day, headlines occupied the front pages. The father who transformed betrayal into hope. Another newspaper wrote, Donald Miller, from poison to justice. Donations began to arrive faster than I expected. Legal associations, elderly advocacy groups, even universities offered support. The money recovered from the trial served to finance the first full year of operations. Soon I found myself working full-time. I reviewed cases, answered calls from people who wanted to tell their stories. Many arrived with fear or shame, but upon leaving, something in their look had changed. Stanley accepted to be the permanent legal advisor of the foundation, while Robert directed the investigation area, helping victims gather evidence and report abuse. In less than a year, we opened a second branch in New Jersey. Every week, new requests for help arrived. I became, without seeking it, the public face of a national campaign titled Justice has no age. I traveled through different states giving talks, sharing my experience in conferences and forums. One morning, while reviewing correspondence in the office, I received a letter with the Department of Corrections seal. I opened it with a foreboding I could not name. It was an official notice. Thomas Miller had died of a heart attack at 42 years old. I read the note several times. I felt neither rage nor relief, only an ancient void, a kind of inner silence. I kept the letter in my pocket and left without saying anything to anyone. In the afternoon, I drove to the small county cemetery where I knew he would be buried. I did not attend the ceremony. I stayed far away behind a fence covered in vines. I saw the hearse pass slowly under the fine rain. When it stopped in front of the grave, I placed a white daisy on the stone wall. "You wanted me to die of a heart attack," I murmured, "but in the end it was you who carried it." The wind blew among the trees, moving the leaves as if they were whispers. I stayed there a few minutes, without tears, only a strange, deep peace, as if I had finally finished a pending conversation with destiny. Weeks later, I returned to the Foundation headquarters. Laura was waiting for me in the lobby. She had prepared a new metal plaque that hung over the main entrance. In engraved letters, it read, "In honor of Donald Miller, the father who turned pain into justice." I ran my hand over the cold metal surface. It was not pride I felt, but gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for having found a purpose in the middle of disaster. Since then, I began visiting the neighborhood nursing home every week. I sat next to the beds, listened to their stories, shared mine. Some cried, others laughed. They said my story reminded them there was still hope. Many times Annie accompanied me. She always brought a small notebook where she noted phrases, gestures, thoughts. One afternoon I asked her, "What are you writing there, little one?" She smiled and responded, "I'm going to write a book about my grandpa. The man who taught me that justice is never late." I laughed and stroked her hair. "When you publish it, I want the first copy dedicated to me." Years kept passing. The foundation grew beyond everything I imagined. We signed agreements with international organizations, trained young lawyers, helped thousands of elderly people recover their dignity. The day I turned 80, the city council gave me a recognition, honorary citizen for his contribution to social justice. On stage, under the glare of the spotlights, I said a few brief words. My son taught me a hard lesson. Blind trust can be a double-edged sword, but he also taught me that from pain, compassion can be born, and that love, if it is true, does not die with betrayal. The audience stood up. The applause resonated like waves. I did not cry, but my heart ached in a serene way, like a wound that finally heals. That night, I returned home alone. The summer air was warm, full of insects and the smell of wet earth. I sat on the porch, turned on a lamp, and opened my old notebook. On the last page, I wrote slowly, with firm handwriting, "The day you tried to poison me, son, you killed the weak part of me. The day I decided to forgive you, I buried the darkness you left in my life." I closed the notebook and left it on the table. I turned off the light. The night wind slipped between the garden trees, gently moving the branches. The moon illuminated the roof and the porch floor where I was sitting, and for the first time, in a long, long time, I felt complete. Free from the past, reconciled with silence, at peace with everything I was and with everything I lost. Because in the end, that, I thought, while the fresh air wrapped around me, was the true legacy of a father. I have learned that a father's true love is not measured in what he gives, but in what he endures without giving up. That forgiveness is not weakness. It is a way to free oneself from the weight of hate. And that justice, when born from pain, can become a light for many others. Sometimes life forces us to look into the eyes of those we love most and accept that they can also hurt us. But even there, we have a choice. Stay in the wound or transform that pain into something that serves others. If you watching this had been in my place, What would you have done? Would you have forgiven? Would you have sought justice? Or would you have simply walked away without looking back? I want to hear your opinion. From the heart, write in the comments what you would do, what you think, what you feel. Your voice can also help someone who is fighting their own battle today. And remember, no darkness is eternal if you decide to walk toward the light. May God bless you and give you strength always.